G'day everyone, Tim here. Welcome to the Australian Reptile Park. Today, one of my favourites, koalas. And this little lady here is Elsa. And Elsa has a bit of a story in that she was hand-reared by one of the keepers here, Hayley. And at about 6 months of age. Now there's two koalas behind me here. It's Rosie at the back and Tree in the front. I was actually down here 2 weeks ago and their joeys in their pouches have grown quite a significant amount in just 2 weeks. But when Elsa was about that age, so about the size of a tennis ball in her mum's pouch, she was actually outside the pouch and something wasn't right. Now through investigation with the team and vets, we found that her mum had actually developed pretty chronic mastitis and so required to go on a treatment of antibiotics and massages daily, and it compromised her ability to look after Elsa. So we intervened and we hand-reared. And it's almost Elsa's first birthday, so we did a pretty good job. But a few things, have a look at this. This little toy that she's on has been with her since day dot. And you provide that when you care for an orphan koala, because even though you're with them so much of the time, you can't be there all the time, and the toy is like a comfort toy. They cling onto it just like they would mum. Now that meant she went on to bottles, 5 a day to start with, and it reduced to 3 and 4. And it was only 2 weeks ago that she had her last bottle and she's weaning. So what happens is now she lives in here with the mums and babies, mums and joeys, and her little toy, I've just taken it down, but it's actually tied onto the tree. So it's a long process to get her from being hand-reared to beginning to climb onto a perch, to beginning to eat eucalyptus leaves. We then bring her down and start integrated through the koala population. And now she's spending her first nights down. And thankfully, we've had some pretty warm weather considering the time of year the last few weeks. But she's a real sweetie. And not all koalas like cuddles. You know, if they're not used to touch, they tend to be a little more standoffish than that. But Elsa just loves it. And quite rewarding to look after her. Now let's have a look at a couple of things on Elsa because she's so easy to look at. The colour might be a little bit hard, but just check out up here on the hand. There we go. 2 thumbs. She's trying to reach out for you guys. We got 2 thumbs, 3 fingers. It's the same on both front hands. And that's simply, if you're going to grip onto a tree, it makes sense to have 2 thumbs on one side rather than one. So they've developed that thumb a long time ago. And big fluffy ears. All koalas do. They actually have quite good hearing. The ears, albeit fluffy, are quite large in there. And this big black nose is incredible for smelling. The leaf that they eat, eucalyptus, and it's the only dietary food that they have, just eucalyptus. There's a few thousand species of eucalypt, but koalas only eat a couple of hundred. Now, their nose is able to differentiate between an old dry leaf or a fresh, young, succulent leaf that they want. And it brings up the question a lot of people ask is, do koalas drink? Well, the short answer is yes, if they have to. But most of the time, they can get their water from the leaves that they eat. It's when we have chronic drought or big heat waves that they may go through a scenario where they come down and they drink. But on the ground, they're vulnerable. Up in the trees, I mean, you can see here some basic camouflage. You've got white, oh, you're gonna come on me? Fair enough. You can see some white on the bottom. And if you're a terrestrial predator looking up, you see clouds and it camouflages in. If you're an aerial predator like an eagle or an owl, the koalas are quite brown and grey on top, and that just blends in with the trees. Their foot pads, oh, your claws are sharp. Their foot pads are very unique and they're really soft, the underside of their feet and hands. They've actually got like an individual fingerprint that's, pretty only normally associated with humans, primates, but koalas have it. And we'll just have a look up here. This is Tree. And I want you to note the discoloration around her face. Do you see it? It's quite waxy. Now Tree, she won't like me doing this, but she has a big joey in there, and that joey's about 4 months old. Now this discoloration, hello sweetie, hey. This discoloration around her face is quite an incredible story. It's actually her poo or her feces. And the reason that it's around her face is because when koalas are born, they're born the size of a jelly bean, a really short pregnancy of 30, 35 days. They're born the size of a jelly bean. They climb into the pouch, they suckle on milk like all marsupials do. But koala joeys aren't born with the enzyme in their stomach to digest eucalyptus. They're not born with the ability to process eucalyptus. They're sold food. So what happens is, when the joey gets as big as trees is, and that's actually the joey, the swelling that you can see just there. When the joey gets as big as trees is, it does what's called papping. And papping is where the female, mum, actually produces and she pushes the food through a digestive system, and she comes out with partially digested poo, and the joeys eat it and they love it. So when you're rearing someone like Ella, you're watching females like this, because once she's been through the bottles, we have to provide the pap for her to be able to eat it, for her to be able to digest eucalyptus. So at this age, I can see, just looking around Tree's face, that her joey's papping, and so she'll be producing quite a runny feces. And it's not uncommon for the mum to get their head in and about, probably checking that the joey's eating it. And the joey actually just pokes its head out of the pouch, because at that age, your joeys, they're incredibly cute, but they're barely furred. So it's a really light, velvety fur, big black nose, you know, and so they come out. Now, look at this swelling here. That's a joey. So that joey has not emerged from the pouch. It might have stuck its head out once or twice, you know, maybe to pat, maybe to have a look around, but it has never left the pouch. And so that's it there that we see. Now, the future for koalas at the present time is pretty bleak as a species. It's hard to believe, or even harder to swallow, because we're talking about a national icon, a cultural icon. Now, in New South Wales, koalas were on a trajectory to be extinct by 2050. It's not any better in Queensland, and it is a bit better down in the southern states, the ACT and South Australia. But their major threats are habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, urban sprawl, domestic dog attacks, a car strike, a run over by cars. But the fires that went through in the 1920 bushfire season annihilated an incredible amount of koala habitat. Now, the forests will regenerate to some degree. Initially, they get epicormic growth, which is when the tree sprouts its leaves out from its core. Now, those leaves are really toxic, and koalas typically don't eat them. And with the intensity of fires that went through, canopy fires, I mean, when you get a more natural, low-intensity fire that burns along the ground, it means that koalas can escape and go up in the trees. You get the canopy treetop fires, it annihilates koalas. Tens of thousands were lost. And the problem is that, I mean, whilst those fires were incredibly extreme, and through all of history, you know, there would have been bad fires, but it's always been the case that koalas can just repopulate an area from next door, so to speak, with continual bush. Nowadays, we've got fragmentation. So when a park burns, on its outside, 'tis typically agriculture or suburbia or a freeway, and that we lack that connectivity. So the ability for a koala to just re-establish a population in a burnt area is really compromised. Now, we're at the Reptile Park today, but our partner conservation organisation, Aussie Ark, we're in the business of species and habitat recovery. And the Ark manages several thousand hectares of koala habitat. Now, there are still complexities in it. Historically, it's been logged, and some of the good food trees have gone, so we've got to reforest. In the wild populations, there is disease like chlamydia and retrovirus. And so we're actually engaging in a partnership with Sydney University to have what I believe will be one of the first wild koala sanctuaries. It's fully fenced, which means there is some limitations to koalas coming and going. But if we don't have a fence, we can't control fire, we can't control feral weeds, we can't, importantly, control feral pests. We're talking about fencing in areas where the fence is 10 kilometres long, and we can still move koalas for genetic reasons between populations. But we're looking at having what I believe will be the first disease-free wild koala population in Australia. And if we can manage that, and look at the size of this joey. Hello Rosie. If we can manage that in a sanctuary, then we can look at it in parks and other areas. But they're coming down now because it's food time. And this is Rosie. She's a beautiful koala. Hello, sweetie. Have a look how these thumbs work here now. Look at that. 1 thumb, 2 thumb, 3 fingers. Hello. What you doing? You want to hold hands? Oh, that sun's nice. They can be pretty affectionate. They're a very slow-moving species, and I'm just about to feed them in a minute. But something that people always ask is, are koalas drunk? Do they get drunk from the eucalyptus? And the short answer is no. The eucalyptus is toxic. It's toxic for humans to eat and would make us very sick. Koalas deal with it because they've got a really long digestive tract. They keep the food in for a long time, they process the toxins and they take the nutrients from it. But back to the question, do koalas get drunk from their leaves and why do they look so sleepy like Rosie here now? The reality is that it is simply a form of energy, making sure that you really don't output more energy than you need to. So when you've got a koala and it's awake for only 4 hours a day, 6 to 4 hours. So you're talking something that sleeps 18 to 20 hours. And the best way of preserving your energy is to sleep. So they wake up for 4 to 6 hours. Guess what they do? They eat. And they don't sleep for 18 to 20 hours. They'll realistically sleep for 4 hours, wake up and eat. Sleep for 4 hours, wake up and eat. But generally, you see a koala like this. Now, if anyone's seen it online, when a male and female mate, you know, it's hectic. When a female's on the ground, they can move at pretty solid speeds. When a male's defending its territory, he's very active. So they have the capability to move fast. What you typically see is a koala like this that is just conserving its energy. And the reason they do that is because the food they eat is so low in nutrient. The eucalyptus provides very little energy. So the best way to conserve energy is to sleep and move slowly and remain calm and relaxed. So the short answer is they don't get drunk from their food. It's just conserving energy. You having a look, Tree? Now, the older females will often let the young females know who's boss. What's she doing to you? Now, I'm going to pop in a little bit of food. And like I mentioned, koalas eat eucalyptus and eucalyptus only. There are a few thousand species of eucalypt, but 200 to 300 species koalas feed upon. Can you pop on there, please? She's not letting go. Come on, you've got to help me out. There you go. You sit on there. So, this here is red gum. And we have to feed a very specific diet, change leaves daily, and they take quite a lot of care. What they're going to eat is this part up here. It's called the tip. Okay, and that's the nice, juicy, succulent part. If you came down lower on the branch, we're talking the difference in a leaf. Might look subtle, but if we have a look at this leaf here, it's very dry. It's, you know, turning brown. And we've got this leaf here that's beautiful and succulent. And that's what you want to eat. Do you want to come and say hello? Come on. There you go. Do you want to help me put the next branch in? All right, she's happy there now. This next one we've got is a blue gum. There you go. Pop back on, please. There you go. Good girl. Now, while I just finish this off, do we have a few questions?
Yeah, people are asking some questions. We want to know, how do you tell the difference between the koalas that we have here at the park?
That's a really good question. How do we individually identify koalas? So the shortcut is they're all microchipped, and you can tell them individually if you scan that microchip. But otherwise, I think it's one of the reasons people have such an affinity with koalas. They have characteristics that we can associate with. Quite a flat face compared to a long pointy face like a lot of animals have. They do have individual features that we can look at that go beyond male or female or 1-year-old or 3-year-old. They have individual features that we can separate them one from the other. A different structure to the head. Some will have lighter fur, darker fur, greyer fur or browner fur. But really, of the 30-odd koalas that are here, every single one of them you're able to look at and know that this is Rosie, and that's Tree, and so on. So they do have very individual characteristics. If this was at Aussie Ark, and we're talking about a wild koala population, and you're looking at the koalas from 30, 40 metres away, you can't tell the difference. I could still pick a juvenile from an adult male from a female, but I could not go to the individual level, just too hard.
What does their fur feel like?
What does koala fur feel like? Well, there's a bit of a story, and it's one of the hardships that koalas face. Now, koalas throughout the mid-1900s, early 1900s, were really in areas hunted near extinction. And to the ports of Brisbane in Queensland for the pelt trade for their fur, there were millions of koalas shipped out. Now, I believe, as history tells it, is After a year or two, the fur falls out, so it made their skin not worth so much, which is a really good thing because we've still got koalas here with us today. But the fur feels like you might imagine. It's really dense. So look, even when I separate it, we can only just get down to the skin. It's not waterproof, but it's certainly water repellent. Takes quite a lot of rain to wet them through. But the fur is just incredibly soft. They're a really beautiful animal.
Do koalas really smell like eucalyptus?
Do koalas smell like eucalyptus? I believe yes. There's a difference between me squashing this leaf and smelling rosy, but the urine, when you get it on you sometimes, it's still pungent eucalypt. Typically the koala itself, just by where it lives, it does smell like eucalyptus, but nowhere near as strong as squashing a leaf and smelling it.
How long does the joey stay with its mum?
Yeah, so female koalas, I guess as a species, koalas are typically solitary. So you'll have a male's territory that's a little bit larger than the females, and the females overlap, and you'll have quite a few female territories around a male. Now, the only time a male and female come into contact is when they breed. That can last for a week. Mum then gives birth to a joey, and the joey's going to stay with mum for at least the next 10 months. And then the mum will go back in and breed again. But for 6 months of that, the joey stays in the pouch. And then for the remaining few months, the joey will be either sitting on the bottom, and at the very end of before mum weans the joey, for the last couple of months, the joey will actually just live on mum's back. And through doing that, they learn about predators, they learn which branches to climb or not to climb, they learn the foods to eat, and really pick up all that necessary behavioural traits from mum.
How's Elsa's mum doing now?
Yeah, Elsa's mum is wonderful. So fortunately, with mastitis, it's a really treatable condition. The easiest thing was for us to intervene and rear Elsa, but mastitis with antibiotics came down. I mean, it's quite a painful, as I'm sure a lot of ladies would appreciate, quite a painful little thing. So for a process there, it was a bit stressful, and you got a really swollen mammary gland. The antibiotics really knocked the infection out of it, and then just a daily sponge and massage. A couple of weeks, she was back to normal, and so there's no long-term health implications.
All right, we might do one last question. How many joeys can a koala have every year?
Yep. So how many joeys can a koala have every year? The answer is 1. Now, if for some unknown reason a female in the wild lost a joey, at a small age, she could have another one that year, technically. But they normally have 1 joey. Twins aren't unheard of, but I've never seen it. It's incredibly rare. So normally it's the joey's with mum for about 10 months from pregnancy to birth to on back and then wean. So they can only have 1 joey a year. Koalas live for about 10 years in the wild, 15 years in captivity, and they breed most of that. So you're talking about an animal that's sort of a mid-term lifespan. 10 to 15 years is, it's not 100, but it's not 2 or 3 like a quoll, or 5 like a Tasmanian devil. But throughout that period, they can still have 8 to 10 young. So it's quite a high turnover. And in terms of, again, if you go to somewhere like Aussiark in conservation facilities, if we can control fire and we manage weeds and we remove feral pests and we reforest, you can actually have an opportunity to increase a koala population quite substantially by those management practices. It's very exciting.
All right, we'll leave it there, Tim. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you're well. Stay safe. See you later.